Welcome to Cultural Home's Manual Restraint and Positive Support Strategies training. Our hope is by the end of this training, you will gain a better understanding of Cultural Home's Manual Restraint policy, what is considered prohibited restraint strategies, what is our allowed manual restraints, how to detect crisis situations, and as well as some positive support strategies you could use to minimize the need to use a manual restraint. By the end of this training, if there are concepts that's still unclear to you, or if you have any further questions or concerns, please feel free to talk to your site manager or speak with the program director. So some learning goals for this presentation. We will review the specific rights and responsibilities of both the consumers and the staff. We'll go over the Cultural Home's Manual Restraints policy. We'll discuss information to help you identify the unique signs that may lead to crisis situation. Go over our company's allowed manual restraint strategies, as well as some tips and alternative strategies that will help you avoid the need for using manual restraints. First of all, it is important to understand that there is not one particular technique, suggestions, or experience that can completely eliminate the need for crisis intervention. We must also remember that Cultural Homes Inc. staff have the responsibility to make sure that all residents are safe and free from harm, abuse, and neglect. As you can imagine, being physically restrained or placed in a seclusion can be very scary, dramatic, and degrading to a lot of people. So it is important that we work with our residents to figure out a more positive and safe way to prevent crisis that works best for them. So a suggestion would be to speak with your residents often to understand them, their needs. What does it look like for them when they get mad? What does a crisis look like for them? And how they would prefer you to help them when they are in a crisis. So, as you already know from reading our company's rights of persons served, our residents have rights that we must respect. One of which is participation in the development and evaluation of the services provided to them. Have services and support identified in their plan provided in a manner that respects and take into consideration the liking and preferences, as well as be free from maltreatment or abuse. Be free from restraints, time out, or seclusion, except for emergency use of manual restraints to protect the person from imminent danger to self or other. So manual restraints should only be used in case of an emergency to protect the safety of the person as well as others around them. I reiterate, it should only be used in an emergency to protect the safety of the person and other people around them. It should not be used for convenience or any other reason. So some definitions. What is seclusion? Seclusion is the involuntary isolation of a person in a locked room. It is also defined as the involuntary confinement of a person alone in the room or in an area from which the person is physically prevented from leaving. So an example of a seclusion would be a staff person taking the resident to their room against their will and put them there and blocking the door so the resident cannot leave. This is not allowed by our policy, and staff should never do this. Our policy also prohibits staff from using chemical restraints, mechanical restraints, and unsafe manual restraints, timeout, seclusion, or any other aversive or deprivation procedures as a way to reduce or eliminate behavior as punishment or for staff convenience. What is a chemical restraint? A chemical restraint is when a staff member gives residents medications against their will in an emergency to reduce their behavior or restrict their freedom of movement. Chemical restraints are often given as an injection or shot. This is typically used in intense crisis hospital units. Sometimes when clients go in there, they will give some shots to kind of soothe them down and help them relax. But chemical restraints can also be given by mouth as a pill or liquid. Again, this is not allowed per our policy. An example of chemical restraint would be a staff forcefully gives clients their PRN medications against their will in order to reduce any behavior that the clients may exhibit. However, it is important to understand that PRN medication prescribed to treat intermediately occurring condition is not considered restraint if the clients take it willingly. The important thing to keep in mind is that the clients have to ask for the PRN and take it willingly. We cannot force it upon them. And then a mechanical restraint is when a device or material is attached to the person's body that restricts their freedom of movement or restricts normal access to the use of the body. An example of mechanical restraint would be handcuffs, strapping the person on their bed using some blankets or such. And then we have physical restraints. Physical restraints is when a manual hold is used to restrict freedom of movement. This may include holding someone against a wall or on the floor, or holding someone's arm and shoulders while forcing them to move from one place to another. An example of this would be a police hold. When police come and nail the person on the floor, that would be a physical restraint. So, and just so we're clear, the types of restraints and examples that I mentioned above is prohibited per our policy. Never ever ever use it on our staff or on our clients. Staff also may not hold or restrain residents in a way that may make it difficult for them to breathe. Staff are also not allowed to use restraints if they know a medical or physical condition such that there is a reason to believe that the restraint techniques used would be in danger to the resident's life or seriously compromise the medical condition. So as mentioned above, per our company's policy, manual restraints should only be used to protect the person or other people from imminent risk of physical harm. The types of manual restraints used must be the least restrictive intervention to eliminate the immediate risk of harm and effectively achieve safety. So remember, the least restrictive. The manual restraints must end when the threats of harm ends. So whenever you have to use a manual restraint, try to use it as briefly as possible to achieve safety for others. The following conditions on their own are not considered conditions for emergency use of manual restraints. The person is engaging in property destruction that does not cause imminent risk of physical harm. So if our clients get upset and they decided to punch walls or flip over the table, but it does not harm anyone else around, then just let them be. The person is engaging in verbal aggression with staff others. Again, this is not immediate danger to anyone, So the best thing would be just to try to de-escalate them, or to get the other residents out of the way, so to give the person some time to calm down. Another reason not to use emergency use of manual restraints would be the person's refusal to receive or participate in treatment of program and such. Emergency use of manual restraints must not be implemented with a child in the manner that constitutes sexual abuse, neglect, physical abuse, or mental injury. It should not restrict a person's normal access to nutrition, diet, drinking water, adequate ventilation, necessary medical care, ordinary hygiene facilities, normal sleeping condition, or necessary clothing, or to give any protection required by state licensing standards and federal regulation governing the program. The manual restraint should also not deny the person visitation or ordinary contact with legal counsel, a legal representative, or their family members. Manual restraints should not be used as a substitute for adequate staffing, for the convenience of staff, as a punishment, or as a consequence if the person refuses to participate in treatment of services provided by the company. Manual restraint should not be applied on the back or chest pressure while a person is in the prone or the face-up position. So as you can see, the key here is to go with the least restrictive alternative that allow maximum freedom of movement while making sure the person and the other people around them are safe. So it is important to understand each and every one of our residents to know what may trigger a crisis and what that may look like for them behavioral wise, as well as what does the resident want staff to do to help them calm down when they're in a crisis. Again, it's not okay to use manual restraint while the person is only engaging in verbal aggression. And manual restraints should only be used as the last option to prevent harm to others and the person. So, alternative positive support strategies. What can you do to prevent having to use manual restraints? The answer to this would be to identify when the crisis is about to happen and provide positive support strategies to help them calm down so they don't have to go into a crisis. So identifying triggers is very important. What are triggers? A triggers is something that sets off an action or a series of reactions that can produce uncomfortable emotions such as fear, agitations, anger, that can lead to a crisis. Triggers are specific to each individual. What may be a trigger for one person may not be a trigger for someone else. And triggers are often changes in the physical and or social environment. So again, it is important to know your clients, know what consider triggers to them, as well as know how to respond when you identify a trigger. That way, we can prevent a crisis from happening. So examples of triggers may include doing bedtime checks, doing room checks sometimes, loud noises, silence, certain noise of a tone or voice, certain smell, very, very large crowd with a lot of people, feelings that no one is listening to what they have to say, being teased or picked by, being touched or being touched in a certain way or on a particular body part, not having control or being told what to do. This is one of the biggest triggers that I often see in our clients. They do not want to be told what to do, which make a lot of sense. So instead of telling what to do, find a more suitable, persuasive way to encourage them to do things. Some of these triggers are easy to identify, such as yelling and room checks, and it's very clear that it is causing a person's particular reaction. Others triggers may not be as easily detected, such as a feeling or emotion that a person is having that is uncomfortable or disturbing to them. So for this reason, it is important to remember that sometimes the signs may not be very obvious, and talking to our residents is a key to helping us identify and understand those triggers. So early warning signs of a crisis about to happen. An early warning sign can be a physical symptom, reaction, or an emotion that can often signal a potential crisis. Some warning signs are observable, such as the client's walking back and forth, some sense of agitation, really big hand movements, crying, shaking, talking in a very loud voice, bouncing legs around, or swearing more than often. There are behaviors that can be easily identified by other people, and there are also other signs that you may not be able to see right away, like a sensation of tightness in the chest, their heart pounding, very shallow breathing, muscle stiffness, as well as headaches. Since these are physical symptoms that are not obvious and cannot be readily observed, it is important that the person who experienced them includes them in their individual crisis plan and talk about them with staff. Knowing a person's early warning signs can help identify and resolve a problem before it leads to a crisis. It is important that some people's warning signs may be another person's strategy for coping with a problem that creates distress. For example, it may be helpful for someone to pace back and forth to lessen the anxiety, providing them a way to use up their excess energy without being harmful to others. In this case, it would be benefit everyone to allow that person to use his or her coping strategies rather than attempting to stop them or control them. Again, for this reason, it is important to know the difference between each person's early warning signs and his or her unique coping strategies to effectively respond and prevent a crisis. It is also important for staff to identify for personal early warning signs to develop their own coping strategies for dealing with potential stressful situations. The more that we know and learn about one another and communicate and talk to one another, the better we can prevent crisis situations from happening. So what are some positive support strategies? We all have our own ways of dealing with problems. These coping strategies help us to manage and minimize the stress that we feel in reaction to difficult or uncomfortable situations. So some of the positive strategies to cope, or some of the alternative positive supporting strategies, include going for a walk, talking with someone who will listen to music, go talk to friend or family, sitting quietly, working out, going to shoot some hoops, watching some TV, taking a shower, or have a snack, or eat a nice meal that can help calm people down a lot of the time. So below is a link to a YouTube video that has some very nice example of alternative support strategies, as well as ways to calm clients down when they are about to go into a crisis. I encourage you to watch it and learn from what the other staffs are doing. So our company's policy allow for some least restrictive manual restraint techniques, and it's listed here. It's the first one, and this goes into order. So you should always start with the first one, which is physical escort or walking. Stage 1 and 2. And you can watch the demonstration for this at the end of this presentation. There should be a link if you're interested in seeing what it looks like. So the first stage would be physical escort walking, stage 1 and 2. If that is ineffective, then you move on to arm restraint, one staff person standing. If that is deemed to be ineffective, then you should move on to arm restraint, one staff person sitting. And reminder that these restraints should be lasting for not too long. Like, don't keep them restrained for too long. Utilizing this restraint techniques will allow time for the person to calm down, or allow time for staff to move other residents away from harm's way, or allow for staff to have time to call 911 and seek help. So again, these restraints should only lasting a few minutes and not longer. While doing the restraints, staff should always monitor to make sure that the person is still safe and that they're not in any uncomfortable position. Alright, so if you have to use a manual restraint, then after having used the restraints, you must report the incident to the site manager as soon as possible, but not later than 8 hours. You have to report it to your manager before you leave for your shift. And then within 24 hours of the incidents of emergency use of manual restraints, your manager will have to notify the person's team members, including their case manager, guardian, or any family members that's involving in their working team. Then, within 3 calendar days, the staff that used manual restraint on the clients must do a report in writing to the site manager, describing who, what, when, where the manual restraint incident happened. So pretty much you're going to have to fill out a longer version of the incident report. And your manager will show you where to find that report once when you do have to fill that out. Then, within 5 days of the emergency use of manual restraint, the program manager will implement and document an internal review of each report of emergency use of manual restraint. And the director will complete the internal review if the program manager is unavailable to do so. And then after that, after 5 calendar days, the program director will do another internal review of the policy and procedures as well as the person's plans to make sure that everything has been carried out correctly and the person is not harmed in any way due to the emergency use of manual restraint. So all in all, it is important to understand that manual restraints is your last resort to use when there is a crisis situation and you're in an emergency, and you should only use it to ensure or to protect the safety of the person as well as other people around them. If you have any questions or anything that's unclear to you, please feel free to ask your site manager. Again, at the end of this video, there are links that you can click on and watch examples of the manual restraints that I talked about. So thank you for watching, and please complete the quiz.